I was paid to scrub the blood from Jay-Z's backstage room at Coachella. I didn't think it would be like this. I didn't know what I was walking into. What I saw that night haunts me. I wasn't supposed to be in that room, but I was. And now, it's all I can think about. Some things you can never forget, and it always stays with you. I never dreamed of working with celebrities or being part of the spotlight. But then came Coachella, 2019, the biggest festival of the year. Everyone was buzzing about it. Jay-Z was headlining, and I got the call. It wasn't glamorous, just backstage logistics, sweeping up after the performances, making sure things were running smoothly for the crew. But it paid well, and it was a chance to be part of something huge, even if it was just as a background player. At first I thought it would be like any other gig, but as soon as I stepped onto the grounds of Coachella, something felt different. The air felt heavy. I'm not talking about the dust or the heat or the usual festival chaos. It was more like a weight pressing down on everything. There was this tension, like the entire place was on edge, waiting for something to happen. I couldn't explain it. I brushed it off as just nerves. Maybe I was just picking up on the excitement surrounding the show. But deep down, I knew something wasn't quite right. The first day was a blur of running around, making sure everything was set up for the performers. The crew was a mix of excited energy and the usual stress of getting things done under tight deadlines. It felt like any other big event. But then came the moment when I was told where I would be working. Go to Jay-Z's private room after the performance, they said. Just clean up and make sure everything's ready for the next show. I didn't think much of it. It was just another cleanup job, right? And it didn't matter that it was Jay-Z's room. In fact, I wasn't even that excited about it. Sure, I respected him as an artist, but I was there to do a job, not to rub shoulders with celebrities. That's how I saw it. Do the work, get paid, and leave. But then I saw the room. I remember walking down the hallway toward it, and even then, there was something about the area that felt different. The hallway was quieter, darker than the rest of the backstage area. The lights flickered a bit, almost like they were struggling to stay on. I figured it was just the lighting, maybe a little power issue, nothing unusual. But the closer I got, the more I could feel it. Something in the air, something thick and heavy, a strange kind of stillness. It wasn't peaceful, it wasn't calming, it was suffocating. When I finally reached the door to Jay-Z's room, I knocked. No answer. But the door wasn't locked, so I went in. And that's when I first felt it, the way the temperature dropped the second I stepped inside. The room was sterile. Expensive, sure, but cold. No warmth, no personal touches. It was as if everything had been placed deliberately, but nothing was meant to stay. There were luxurious couches, tables with expensive bottles of alcohol, a few scattered magazines, but no signs of life, and nothing that made it feel like a space a person actually inhabited. It was empty, almost too empty. It was a space designed to look lived in, but you could tell no one had ever really stayed there. But then I saw it, the bloodstains. At first, I thought it was just some accident, maybe a spilled drink or someone had cut themselves in a rush. But as I walked further into the room, it became clear this was no accident. The blood, there was a lot of it. Thick, dark stains that stretched across the floor. It wasn't something I could just wipe away with a towel. It was too much. Too thick. It looked wrong. My mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation. Maybe there was a fight, maybe someone had an accident, but none of it made sense. Jay-Z's team, his people, they were all meticulous. There was no way something like this could happen by mistake, especially not in his private room, in a place like Coachella. I tried to push the thoughts aside. I had a job to do. I picked up the cleaning supplies, ready to get to work, but as I started scrubbing the bloodstains, something strange happened. It wouldn't come off. The blood seemed almost alive, like it was rejecting the cloth. The more I wiped, the darker the stains became. They spread slowly, inch by inch, like they were feeding off the friction. I looked around the room again. Something was wrong. I could feel it now. I wasn't supposed to be in that room. I wasn't supposed to be cleaning up whatever it was that had happened there. And it wasn't just the blood. It was everything. The air felt too thick. The shadows too deep. It felt like the room was alive. But I couldn't stop myself. I had to finish the job. And the more I scrubbed, the more that cold, suffocating feeling surrounded me. It was like I was being drawn into it. The room itself felt like it was pulling me closer to the stains, to whatever had happened there. It was like I couldn't escape. And that's when I found it. A journal. It was hidden under the floorboards, almost like it had been placed there, waiting for someone to find it. The pages were yellowed, old. As I opened it, I saw that it wasn't just a journal. It was a record of deals, of rituals, of pacts made for power, for fame. The blood wasn't just blood. It was something much darker. And somehow, it was tied to Jay-Z's success. I should have walked away. I should have left the room, but I didn't. I kept reading. And what I read made my skin crawl, because that's when I realized I wasn't just cleaning up blood. I was erasing something, a payment, a price for the fame, for the rise, for the success. The blood wasn't just a mistake. It was part of a ritual, a symbol. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. I walked into the room feeling a rush of air as the door swung open. The faint hum of the festival outside was muffled the moment I stepped in. It was like entering a different world entirely, a world that felt disconnected from everything else. The loud music, the cheering crowd, the chaotic energy of Coachella, it all seemed so far away now. I couldn't hear it anymore. Everything was suddenly quiet, still. And maybe that's what should have tipped me off. But I didn't feel anything at first. At least, not right away. Jay-Z's private room at Coachella was, well, it wasn't what I expected. Not that I had any real idea what I was expecting. Maybe a flashy space, a room filled with reminders of his success, maybe a few gold records on the wall, a luxurious lounge area, some cutting-edge tech to keep him comfortable. But no, this was minimalist. Too minimalist. It was clean, sleek, and empty in a way that felt like it was trying too hard to be clean. Every piece of furniture was symmetrical, carefully placed. Even the lighting seemed too perfect, too controlled. There were expensive leather couches, polished tables, and a couple of fancy chairs, but the room lacked a certain warmth. It was too perfect, almost as if it wasn't meant to be used, but to look at. I wasn't impressed, but I wasn't disgusted either. At first, I thought it was just another fancy space, nothing too special, the kind of room you'd expect to see backstage at a high-end show. I could feel a kind of coldness in the air, but it didn't make sense at first. The kind of cold that comes from the air conditioning being set too low. or from a room that's been sealed off for too long. So, I told myself to ignore it, shrugged it off. The room felt sterile, but it was comfortable. If you could ignore that unsettling feeling creeping up on you. I glanced around for a moment, just trying to get my bearings. I didn't think much of it at the time, but I was standing still a little too long, soaking in the perfection of it all. The polished marble floor beneath my boots, the exact placement of the furniture, everything crisp and spotless. There wasn't a single personal item in sight. No clothes, no luggage, nothing that said Jay-Z the way you'd expect. It was like the room was meant to be observed, not lived in. But that thought slipped from my mind just as quickly as it came. I had a job to do, a quick one. I dropped my cleaning supplies onto the floor near the entrance and bent down to grab the mop and bucket. As I moved, my eyes fell on the dark, glaring stains at the far end of the room. My heart skipped a beat. The blood was the first thing I saw. It was impossible not to. The sight of it hit me harder than I expected. I stood there for a moment, staring at the dark patch of floor that was covered in it. It wasn't even the amount of blood that caught my attention. It was the way it stood out against the perfect, immaculate surroundings. The stark contrast of the deep red against the sterile room. I hadn't expected to walk into something like this. The blood wasn't just sitting there either. It wasn't a splatter from someone's careless mistake. No, it was dark, thick, almost like it had been there for days. And the worst part? It looked like it was moving, like it was alive. At first I figured someone had bled on the floor and left it behind in a rush. Maybe it was from a minor injury, nothing to worry about. Maybe it was even some accident. I had to keep my mind calm, I told myself. I could clean it up. Get in, get out. So I took a deep breath, grabbed the mop, and started working. I moved over the stains, slowly at first, just testing the water, seeing if I could get it to lift up. The air in the room felt unnaturally still. Every movement I made seemed louder somehow. My feet echoed off the marble floor, the sound bouncing back at me from every corner of the room. I tried to ignore it, but the silence was oppressive, making my own actions feel out of place. There was something wrong with the air. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but it felt like something was heavy in the atmosphere. It wasn't just the quiet of the room either. It was something else. The longer I mopped, the more I noticed small details. The lighting in the room was odd too. Soft, but stark in a way that felt manufactured. Every corner of the space was lit as though it were carefully measured for the perfect visual effect. No shadows, nothing that felt natural. Everything was too perfect. The lights didn't flicker, but the hum they made, that constant low hum, became the only sound in the room, pushing its way into my ears, drawing my attention away from everything else. My hands were already beginning to shake. I could feel the bloodstains pushing back against the mop, refusing to be wiped away, as though they were unalive clinging to the floor. It was so absurd that I almost laughed. Blood can't fight back, right? It's just a stain. But the more I worked at it, the more I began to feel the strange, creeping pressure in the air, like the room was closing in on me. I paused for a second and looked around again. It wasn't just the blood. There was something about the way the room was laid out, the emptiness of it all, that felt suffocating. It made my stomach turn. I couldn't help but glance over my shoulder, feeling like something was lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. I didn't hear anything, but I could feel it. Someone, something, watching. It wasn't just a strange feeling, it was a certainty. My body tensed, my back straightened, my eyes scanning the corners of the room. The whispers from the back of my mind began to grow louder, though I didn't understand them. I tried to shake it off. I was here to do a job, and that's exactly what I was going to do. Just get it done and leave. But then, as I mopped the last of the blood, I felt it. Something hard, like the edge of a journal or some other object beneath the floorboards. I wasn't expecting anything like this. I stopped, heart racing, and bent down to pry up the floorboard. And there it was, tucked away, hidden from sight, an old, beaten-up journal. My hands trembled slightly as I grabbed it. It wasn't the kind of thing you'd expect to find in a place like this, let alone in a celebrity's private room. I didn't know what it was at first. I flipped it open without thinking. And when I saw the pages inside, I froze. They weren't filled with music notes or plans for a new album. No, these pages were filled with something darker. References to rituals, to deals, to prices that had been paid. Suddenly, the room didn't feel like a safe, sterile space anymore. I wasn't just cleaning up after a performance. I wasn't just here for the job. I was erasing something. Something that should have never been allowed to stay hidden. Something connected to that blood on the floor. The unease I'd been feeling all along, the tightness in my chest, the hairs on the back of my neck suddenly made sense. This wasn't just a job anymore. It wasn't just a cleanup. It was something bigger, something darker. But what I uncovered next would change everything I thought I knew about that room. There's always that moment, isn't there? The one where you can't put your finger on it, but you know deep down that something isn't right. I'd finished with the bloodstains. At least, I thought I had. But as I moved to collect my things and head out, the feeling lingered, refusing to leave me. It wasn't the blood. It wasn't the eerie stillness of the room. It was something else. Something deeper. A shift in the atmosphere that had no obvious source, but made everything feel wrong. I should have known that the moment I picked up that journal, I was in way over my head. But I didn't. I still thought it was just a strange job, nothing more. Cleaning up after a show. It wasn't like I was involved in anything sinister, right? Yet, as I walked out of the room, I felt it again. The heavy weight, like the walls were pressing in, like something unseen was watching me. But I shook it off. It was probably just the nerves from being in such a high-pressure situation. But that didn't explain the first strange encounter. It was after I'd finished cleaning the room and was about to leave. I stepped into the hallway, the door closing behind me, and I almost breathed a sigh of relief. The air outside felt lighter. The tension in the room was still there, but at least I was away from it. Or so I thought. I walked past the lounge area, my mind still on the strange, unsettling atmosphere of the private room I'd just left. Then I saw him. He was one of Jay-Z's security staff, a big guy, built like a brick wall. He was standing near the door, his arms crossed, watching me walk by. But there was something in the way he looked at me. His eyes were cold, calculating. And it wasn't the usual, I'm just doing my job glance you get from people who are used to dealing with crowds. No, this look was different. It was more like he knew something I didn't. Like he saw me as a threat, like he was measuring me, sizing me up in a way that didn't sit right with me. I met his gaze for a moment, my stomach tightening. I didn't want to make eye contact, but I couldn't help it. The stare felt heavy, like there was some unspoken understanding between us. He didn't move, just watched me, his expression unreadable. I tried to ignore it, telling myself he was just doing his job, just being cautious. But the look he gave me stuck with me. It made my skin crawl. It wasn't just a security look. It felt like I was under some kind of silent scrutiny. I kept walking, my pace quickening as I moved past him, hoping he wouldn't follow. He didn't, but his eyes remained on me, like a shadow I couldn't shake. When I reached the end of the hall, I was about to turn a corner when I heard a soft click, a door opening behind me. I spun around, my heart racing. I couldn't explain why, but I knew it wasn't just some staff member moving around. There was something off about the way the door opened, like it wasn't meant to be opened, like someone was sneaking out or trying to get in without being seen. I couldn't see who it was, but I saw the door close again just as quickly. I stood there for a second, frozen. The hallway was empty now, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't supposed to be there. Something wasn't right. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to go back and check it out. I couldn't just leave it like that. As I retraced my steps, I noticed a strange detail. There was a door near the end of the hall that I hadn't seen before. It wasn't marked, and it didn't look like anything important. It just blended into the background, hidden in plain sight. I'd walked past it a few times earlier, but now it stood out. It was locked. I tried the handle just out of habit, but of course, it didn't open. I stood there for a moment, unsure of what to do. I wasn't supposed to be snooping around, but everything in me told me that I needed to know what was behind that door. The same strange feeling that had been nagging at me since I walked into Jay-Z's private room was now seeping into my bones. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was something deeper. Something that told me there was a reason. That door was locked. And if I didn't find out, I'd never get this feeling off my chest. I walked away. There wasn't much I could do about it. I had a job to finish, and I was already feeling uneasy, but something gnawed at me. I kept glancing back at that door. Every time I looked at it, it seemed to loom larger, more foreboding, as if it were waiting for me to make the wrong move. It was then that I saw him again. The security guard. Only this time, he wasn't looking at me. He was talking to someone in a low voice, his back turned to me, but his posture was stiff, rigid. Whoever he was speaking to, they were out of sight, but I could tell he wasn't happy. I caught a few words, something about staying quiet, not letting it slip. My ears pricked up, but I couldn't make out the rest. I had no idea who he was talking to or what he meant, but the way he spoke, like there was something they needed to hide, made me feel even more on edge. I couldn't help but feel that the whole place was just one big act. The smile on everyone's face, the way they moved around like they were all playing their part in a performance. But there was something off about it. Something underneath the surface. I tried to shake it off, to focus on the job at hand, but I couldn't. I'd seen too much. Heard too much. I was starting to understand that whatever was going on here, it wasn't just about cleaning up after a concert. There was something else. Something bigger than I was supposed to know. The guard's words kept echoing in my head. and I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being pulled into something I didn't understand. And then there was the celebrity himself, Jay-Z. It wasn't anything overt, nothing you'd notice if you weren't paying attention. It wasn't his actions exactly. It was more the way he carried himself, the way he seemed so disconnected from the people around him, like he wasn't even fully there. It wasn't a new feeling for me. I've worked with a lot of celebrities, and most of them have this sort of detached energy. They have to. It's part of the persona. But Jay-Z, in that moment, it was different. The usual charm, the confidence, the energy that people talked about, it wasn't there. It was like he was moving through the motions, going through the day, but not truly engaged. At first, I thought it was just exhaustion from the show, but there was something else in his eyes. A blankness. And I couldn't shake the thought that he was hiding something. Or worse, that he was being controlled by something else. Something that had taken away whatever made him, him. And that was just the beginning. The feeling didn't go away. The unease, that gnawing feeling that something wasn't quite right, it stuck with me as the night wore on. I kept pushing it down, telling myself it was just the stress of the job, the pressure of working behind the scenes at such a massive event. But deep inside, I knew something had shifted. I wasn't just cleaning up a mess. I wasn't just doing my job anymore. I was caught up in something much bigger than I ever expected. That's when it all started to change. I was finishing up the last few details in Jay-Z's room, trying to ignore the buzzing in the back of my mind. I'd been moving about the room, tidying up, checking for any last-minute stains or marks. The blood from earlier had started to fade, but there was still a faint trace of it, like a scar that wouldn't quite heal. No matter how much I tried to scrub it away, the memory of it lingered. I was pulling some trash bags from the corner of the room when I heard it. The door. It opened behind me. I wasn't expecting anyone. I hadn't seen anyone since the security guard had disappeared down the hallway hours ago. But now the door creaked open with an almost unnatural slowness. I turned around. Standing there in the doorway was a woman. She was tall, dressed in all black, slick black pants, a tight black jacket that seemed to swallow her whole, her face partially obscured by dark sunglasses. I couldn't see her eyes, but I could feel them on me, heavy, like she was watching every move I made. Her presence was strange, not in a way that made you think suspicious, but in a way that made you feel unseen, like she was in the room, but at the same time, not in the room. She didn't belong there. She wasn't meant to be there. She didn't speak at first. She just stood there, framed by the doorway. I could hear the faint hum of the music from the festival in the distance, but it seemed so far away now. This room was its own world, and I felt the weight of it pressing in on me. The air grew thicker. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. Something inside of me told me that something was about to happen. I opened my mouth to ask if she needed something, but nothing came out. I felt like I was drowning in her silence. Finally, she spoke. "You're the one who's been cleaning this up," she said, her voice cold, like she wasn't really talking to me, but rather just acknowledging my presence. I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. She didn't seem to care about my response. She stepped inside, her heels clicking on the polished floor. I noticed she didn't seem to care about the state of the room, the bloodstains still faintly visible, the unsettling, sterile vibe still hanging in the air. She didn't flinch, didn't react. She just walked to the center of the room, standing there for a long moment, surveying it, like she was looking at something I couldn't see. "You didn't get it all?" she said, her voice low and deliberate. "You didn't get the part that matters." My heart skipped a beat. I didn't know what she meant, but the way she said it made my blood run cold. I couldn't even remember the last time I'd felt this level of unease, this sense that something was terribly wrong, like I wasn't in control anymore. I opened my mouth, but I couldn't find the words to explain what had happened in the room. The blood, the journal, everything. I wasn't even sure if I was supposed to tell her anything. The weight of the room, the energy, felt like it was suffocating me. I just stood there, frozen. Her eyes, hidden behind the sunglasses, never left me. "You should have left when you had the chance," she said. It wasn't a threat. It was a statement, a fact. I wasn't sure what she meant. I wanted to ask her, but I couldn't. The room felt like it was closing in, the walls pressing tighter around me. I couldn't breathe. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape, but something kept me rooted to the spot. My body wouldn't move. And then it happened. There was a sudden, violent shift in the air. It felt like the entire room had jolted. The temperature dropped. Not just a few degrees, it plummeted. I felt a chill deep in my bones, and I gasped for air. The light in the room flickered, then went out entirely. For a split second, there was only darkness. Not the usual kind of darkness you expect when the lights go out, but something heavier. Something wrong. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to stretch and twist, as if they were alive. They moved, not like shadows do, but like they had minds of their own. They didn't just sit there anymore. They shifted. My heart pounded in my chest, my blood rushing in my ears. I heard a low, almost imperceptible hum. It wasn't from the lights or from any equipment. It came from the walls, from the floor. It was like the room itself was breathing. I didn't understand what was happening. My legs were trembling, and I could feel the sweat on my palms, but I couldn't move. I was frozen, caught in the midst of whatever this was. The woman took a step forward, her presence suddenly overwhelming. She didn't speak again, but I felt the change. It was like she was pulling something out of me, like she was drawing me in with a force I couldn't resist. Then the lights came back on, but it wasn't the same. The room wasn't the same. The bloodstains on the floor were darker, black almost. It wasn't just the floor. The walls had darkened too, as though they had absorbed the very essence of what was happening here. The air was thick with something foul, something I couldn't explain. It felt like the room itself had become something else, something alive, something aware. The woman stood still in the center of the room, her posture rigid, unmoving. She was no longer just a person. She felt different, like she had become part of the room itself, part of whatever dark energy was now choking the air. Her presence was suffocating. I felt like I was suffocating. My breath came in short, shallow gasps. I couldn't look away from her. I couldn't even look at anything else. There was only her. Only the way she stood there, watching me. There was something in her eyes, or rather, where her eyes should have been. They were hidden, but I could feel them. It was like she wasn't looking at me anymore. She was through me. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. But my legs wouldn't move. My body wouldn't respond. Now you see, she said, her voice soft, but the words felt like a hammer striking me. Now you know why you were chosen, why you were brought here. I couldn't understand. None of it made sense. And that's when it hit me. The truth. Whatever I had walked into, whatever had been happening in that room, it wasn't just about cleaning up. It was about erasing something that had been there for much longer than I could ever understand. Something that wasn't meant to be erased. Then came the real shock. The woman slowly turned, her back to me now, and I heard her footsteps, faint but deliberate, as she moved toward the door. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. But I wasn't the only one in the room anymore. I heard it. The whispering. Low, guttural, impossible to make out, but it was there. It surrounded me. It filled the space. And then she was gone. The door slammed shut behind her, but the room didn't return to normal. The air was still thick, the shadows still twisted and shifted, and I could hear the blood stirring as though it was alive. I was left there in the silence that followed, the hum still vibrating beneath my feet. I wanted to run. I wanted to escape. But I knew, deep down, that it was too late for that. I don't remember when I stopped breathing, but I know I was suffocating. The moment the door slammed shut behind her, I was alone again. But I wasn't alone. The room wasn't empty anymore. It felt full, as though something had been added, or maybe something had awakened. The blood on the floor, the black, sickly stains that refused to vanish no matter how hard I scrubbed, was still there. But now, it had a presence. The air was thick, stifling, and the shadows that clung to the corners of the room seemed to move like they were creeping toward me. I could feel them in the corners of my eyes, pulling at my mind. I wasn't just in that room anymore. I was inside it. I was part of it, and I couldn't get out. My heartbeat pounded in my chest, deafening. I tried to breathe, to steady myself, but the more I tried, the more everything around me seemed to close in. The room, Jay-Z's private room, the one I had entered without hesitation just hours before, had become something else. It was like the walls themselves had expanded, grown, pushed outward to trap me, to hold me in place. I turned to face the door, to try to make sense of what had just happened, but my feet wouldn't move. I was frozen. I couldn't look away from the blood, the way it seemed to shift and pulse under the dim light. It felt alive. There was no other way to describe it. Suddenly, I heard something, a whisper. Soft at first, almost like a breath against my ear, but it was there. My breath caught in my throat as I spun around looking for the source, but there was no one there. No one. The whispers didn't stop. They were growing louder, like the room was filled with them, like they were coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. I couldn't understand the words. They were too distorted. But the tone, I could feel the tone. It was pleading. It was begging. Leave. The voice seemed to whisper, but I couldn't be sure. I stumbled back, my heart hammering in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I could feel my pulse in my ears, drowning out the whispers, the hum of the room. I slammed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, trying to stop myself from falling apart. But it didn't help. The voices were inside my head now. Leave, they pleaded again. It's not supposed to be you. I backed away from the center of the room, unsure of where to go. It felt like the room was alive, breathing with me. The shadows on the walls were no longer shadows. They were moving. They were shifting and stretching toward me. And every time I blinked, they were closer. But it wasn't just the shadows. It was the blood, too. It began to shift. The blood on the floor, which had been stagnant and dark before, seemed to pulse. It wasn't just a stain anymore. It was something else, something alive. It felt like it was watching me, like it was aware of my every movement. And as I stared at it, I could almost see the shape of something in the dark liquid. A figure, a face, eyes. I blinked. It was gone. My head spun. I turned away from the stain, from the suffocating room, my hands shaking. I needed to leave. I had to leave. I reached for the door, but the knob wouldn't turn. It was stuck, frozen. I pulled again, harder this time, but nothing. Please, I begged, voice cracking. I was choking on the air, choking on the overwhelming feeling that something was inside this room with me. Something I didn't understand. Something that didn't belong. I was trapped. I knew what was happening, even if I didn't want to admit it. I had seen it before, heard the rumors, the stories, the whispers of people who had come into contact with things they couldn't explain. I had heard of rooms like this. Rooms where the boundaries between this world and something darker were blurred. But I didn't believe it. Not really. Not until now. I glanced over at the walls where the shadows had become more distinct, more solid. They weren't just dark spots anymore. They were figures. Figures that were starting to take shape like silhouettes, faces. And then I heard it. A low growl. A rumble that came from the walls, from the floor. A vibration in the air, as if the very space around me was alive, resonating. It grew louder, stronger. It was an unholy sound, deep and guttural, like something primal was trying to break free. The floor beneath me began to shake. The walls shuddered. Then came the sound. It was impossible to describe, but I'll try anyway. It was the sound of tearing flesh, tearing metal, tearing something real. My ears rang with it, and for a moment, I thought I was going insane. I reached for my head, clutching my temples, but the noise wouldn't stop. It grew louder, more insistent, and then it stopped. For a split second, everything was dead quiet. And in that silence, I felt it. A presence. I wasn't alone in that room anymore. I could feel it. A weight behind me, a coldness that wrapped around me like a vice. Something there, something watching. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even a thing I could see. But I could feel it. And I knew that whatever it was waiting for me to turn around. The blood, the shadows, the whispers, it was all coming together, converging into something I couldn't understand, couldn't fight. It was as if I had crossed a line, something I didn't know existed. And now I was paying the price. Slowly, my body refused to move. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream, but I couldn't. My feet were frozen to the floor. My heart was pounding in my ears, and the room felt smaller, closer, as though it was squeezing me tighter with every passing second. I turned, and there, standing in the center of the room, was a figure. It wasn't a person. It wasn't a shadow either. It was something other. I couldn't make out its features at first. It was too dark, too twisted. But as I focused, I realized it wasn't just standing there. It was moving, shifting, bending in unnatural ways. It looked like it was made of the shadows themselves, part of the room. And I swear, for just a second, I saw eyes. Dark, empty, and hungry eyes. My stomach turned, bile rising in my throat. I knew what it was. And that was when everything changed. The room was no longer just a room. It was a prison, a place where things that shouldn't exist came to life. I could feel it in the air. I could feel it in the walls, in the shadows that were closing in on me, and the thing that was standing in front of me. I was trapped. This wasn't just about cleaning up after a show anymore. This wasn't just about bloodstains on a floor. I had stumbled into something that didn't belong in this world. Something ancient, something hungry. And now, it was awake. The door behind me slammed shut, the sound of metal grinding against metal like a giant monstrous hand locking me in place. The thing in front of me took a step forward, then another, and then everything went dark. I don't remember how long I stood there frozen in place. The air had gone completely still, but it wasn't a stillness you could relax in. It was the kind of silence that clamped down on your chest, making it hard to breathe, like the room itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I should have run. I should have turned and bolted for the door, but my feet wouldn't move. My body was locked in place, my mind racing but unable to act. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, my breath coming in shallow gasps. And all I could do was stare at that figure, that shape in the center of the room. It wasn't a person. It wasn't even something I could fully comprehend. It was like the very shadows of the room had taken form, twisted into something that shouldn't have been. The air around it felt thick, charged with a kind of energy I couldn't explain. It was like nothing I had ever felt before. I knew instinctively that it wasn't human. It wasn't even alive in the way we understand life. But it was real. The thing, I don't even know what to call it, was moving slowly, its shape flickering in and out of focus, as though it was made of the very darkness that surrounded it. It was like it was watching me, like it could feel my fear, drawing closer with each passing second. And still, I stood there, terrified. I had read about things like this before. You know, those horror stories people tell about haunted places, strange occurrences, things that can't be explained. But you never think it will happen to you. I never thought it would happen to me. I was just a guy doing his job. I wasn't meant to be caught up in something like this. And yet, here I was. I don't know how long I stayed in that spot, staring at the figure. It felt like hours, but I knew it couldn't have been. Time seemed to bend in that room. Nothing made sense anymore. My mind was screaming at me to run, to get out of there, but my body wouldn't respond. It was as though I was trapped in some kind of nightmare I couldn't wake up from. And then I heard it. The voice. The same cold voice that had spoken to me earlier. The woman with the dark sunglasses. It was faint at first, but unmistakable. "You shouldn't have stayed," she said, her voice echoing in the darkness. "You're already part of it now." I turned toward her voice, and for the first time, I saw her. She was standing near the door, her face still hidden behind the sunglasses, but now there was something different about her. She was no longer just a strange, imposing figure. She looked different, more detached, as if she were no longer human. It hit me all at once. She wasn't just a person in the room. She was a part of whatever was happening here. My voice cracked. I couldn't find the words. My throat was dry. My whole body felt like it was shaking, but I couldn't move. I was stuck, paralyzed by a terror I couldn't explain. "You've seen it now," she said, her voice sharp, cutting through the silence. "You've seen the truth. You've seen what happened when you start messing with things you don't understand." I didn't want to hear it. I didn't want to know. I wanted to run, to leave, to forget any of this had ever happened. But it was too late for that. I had already crossed some kind of line. I swallowed hard, trying to gather the strength to speak. What do you want from me?" I finally managed to say. She stepped forward slowly, her eyes never leaving me. "I don't want anything from you. You've already given enough, but now you know. Now you're part of this, and you can't walk away." The weight of her words hit me like a punch to the gut. I was trapped. There was no escape. There was no going back to the way things were before I stepped into that room, before I saw it. Whatever this was, it had chosen me. And now, I couldn't undo it. I wanted to scream, to beg, to cry out for help, but it was useless. My body was still frozen, my mind spiraling in a desperate attempt to process everything that had happened. The shadows in the room seemed to move closer, pressing in around me. The bloodstains, once faint, had deepened. The room felt alive with something dark and hungry. And then it happened. The figure in the center of the room moved. Slowly at first, like it was testing the air, like it was feeling its way forward. It wasn't walking. It was shifting. It didn't have legs or a body or anything resembling a normal form. It was made of the very darkness that surrounded it. And now, it was coming for me. I stumbled back, finally able to move, but my legs were weak, trembling beneath me. I fell to the floor, my back hitting the cold, hard surface, my hands instinctively reaching for something, anything, to stop myself from falling further. My breath was coming in short, panicked gasps, my chest tightening. The thing was coming closer. It didn't make a sound as it moved toward me. It didn't need to. The air was heavy with its presence. I could feel it, pressing down on me, suffocating me. My hands scrabbled on the floor, trying to push myself away, but I was stuck. The fear in my chest had locked me in place. I couldn't move, couldn't think. All I could do was stare at the thing moving toward me. "Please, please," I whispered, the words barely escaping my lips. The figure was almost on top of me now. The darkness was so close I could almost feel it wrapping around me, pulling me in. And then, just as quickly as it had started, the pressure lifted. The shadows receded. The temperature in the room returned to normal, and the oppressive weight that had been crushing me lifted, leaving me gasping for air. I looked up, eyes wide, heart pounding. The figure was gone, but the room hadn't returned to normal. It had changed. The walls seemed closer now, the air heavier. The bloodstains had spread. The once clean floor was now marred with marks, like deep gouges had been carved into the marble. The room was no longer sterile, no longer empty. It was something else. Something alive. I stumbled to my feet, my legs barely able to hold me. I turned, trying to find the door, but it was gone. The walls had shifted. The exit that had once been there was now just an empty space, a solid wall where the door had once been. I was trapped. "Now you see," the woman's voice echoed from the shadows, but I couldn't see her anymore. "You can't leave." No one can leave. I fell to my knees, tears blurring my vision. This wasn't just some bad dream. It wasn't a hallucination. This was real. And now I was part of it. The darkness was closing in again. I couldn't breathe. I couldn't escape. And I knew this was only the beginning. But what happened next took things to a whole new level. I've tried to forget. I've tried to push it out of my mind, to live like nothing ever happened. But every night when the lights go out, I hear the whispers again. Every time I close my eyes, I see the shadows moving in the corners of the room. And I know that whatever I saw that night, it didn't stay there. It followed me. If you ever hear of me disappearing, just know it's not over. It's never over. And whatever is still in that room, it's still waiting.